Hello, this presentation is going to be about paper writing and some guidelines for how to produce that final paper, which, as you probably know, but if you don't, this is a reminder, is going to be due in just about a month at the end of the semester. I'm Katie Borkman, your instructor, and I hope in what follows I'll be able to give you some good guidance. Remember that in your course there are some links to other information, other bits and pieces of information about how to do a paper, helpful hints, and I'll be talking about this subject periodically throughout the rest of the semester. Many of you already are familiar with the mechanics of writing a paper, but I just want to emphasize that this is an important part of your grade, and I would like you to try to do the very best job you can to maximize your score. Nobody seems to have anything to worry about thus far in the semester with regard to a decent passing grade, but this is worth some points, and so what I propose to do is to try to help you really get a handle on not only how to do your paper, its mechanics, and some basic guidelines, but also on perhaps some topics. As it says here, try to avoid flowery introductions. This is basically an argument paper, so all you really need to do is focus on the statement such as, and you can word this according to your own particular tastes and preferences. In this paper, I will argue that, and there will be a single proposition that you're going to try to defend in your argument. In this paper, I'm going to argue that, and you'll pick some topic out of the book, out of the textbook that we've discussed, or some philosophical topic that you can dig your teeth into. Actually, philosophers don't mind using the so-called first person, rather than the somewhat, perhaps, seemingly obtuse statement such as, "It is to be argued that," which is essentially a nice third-person way of doing it. It's fine to say, "I'm going to argue that." Don't overuse I, but don't worry about using it. I know that there is something of a prohibition that people have learned in writing classes in the past about the use of I, but you're the one that's doing the argument. And if I'm writing a paper, I'm the one that's making the argument. Organize your paper. Sometimes it's a good idea to write a draft. Sometimes it's a good idea to write an outline. What are the main points you wish to make? Are they all related to each other in important ways? And here's an example. In this paper, I'm going to argue that, and then I'm going to show you that. And that's the first paragraph. And then what you do in a paper is you go on to provide some detail, to put some meat on the bones. So generally speaking, the introduction is like a preamble to what you're going to do. In my paper, I shall show that. And I'm going to give the following reasons, and you just put it all up front. Just make sure that your main thesis or your claim, we use the word claim in logic and philosophy, is like your main thesis statement. And that whatever it is that you utilize in order to support your claim should be relevant. And if it's not, then don't include it. You would use quotes. I would recommend not to use too many quotes. You're going to make a point, and you're going to perhaps try to find somebody who agrees with you, like Descartes or Aristotle or Plato or some other philosopher that we have been discussing over the past couple of weeks. And you should be able to say in your own words what it is that you really want to demonstrate. And remember, that's what we call a position paper or an argument paper, and so you're not actually doing research, but research is in the background. And I think you're going to be able to find just about everything you want with respect to what you've read in the textbook, or any of the references indicated in the textbook that you want to pursue, or any of those other things that have been placed up in your course. You would write your paper so as to not make assumptions, unwarranted assumptions about the familiarity of the person reading the paper. That is to say, you don't want to assume that the person is an expert in what you're talking about. But by the same token, you don't have to completely go back over the history of an idea. I'm the one mainly that's going to be reading your paper, and I know a little bit about already what you're likely to be talking about if it has philosophical implications. So you want to write from this clarity perspective so as not to use words that are just simply flowery embellishments. In other words, just get to the point in what you want to state. If you actually happen to be, quote-unquote, this is a war word, attacking somebody's position, in other words, you can make a paper in which you're going to argue that something that you've read about from the point of view of philosophy doesn't make any sense to you, and here's why. So we're going to use that military word attack. Probably another word that's actually a little nicer is critique or argue against. And this little pyramid to some extent might help a little bit. What you want to do is explicitly refute the point of somebody else's claim or thesis statement. And if you just kind of go through this little layered hierarchy here, you'll see that the lower end is simply name calling and then use of ad hominem arguments, and I'm pretty sure that by now you've encountered a good deal of the phenomenon of name calling, ad hominem arguments, and only responding to tone or only contradicting somebody. Name calling and ad hominem are probably the lowest form of attempting to attack, if you will, somebody else's argument. And when I say that you've probably been exposed to this for some time, you're getting even more exposed to it during any election cycle. I'm sorry to say that at times it seems that that's all people do, is engage in name calling, ad hominem arguments, or just simply outright contradict somebody. But, if you are contradicting somebody but you have good reasoning, that's what makes a difference. And then if you find a mistake in somebody else's position, then you can explain why it's a mistake. And then you can go on to actually say why somebody else's position on such and such is not the case. This could be about, for example, the notion of aesthetics. Some people argue that aesthetics is about feeling, mostly. And you might argue, well, I believe that that point is not a correct point for the following reasons. And then go on to assert what your point is, which could be, I believe that aesthetic judgment is more cognitive. I'm obviously not going to go into too much detail about that, but as you can tell, it's a little bit different than, starting by calling somebody by a name, or maybe making fun of their appearance, which seems to be going on a little bit more now in our culture, or just simply outright stating that the person doesn't really have the appropriate authority. But you have to understand that you'll have to research whether or not a person has the kind of authority necessary to be able to make certain kinds of claims. Since it's a position paper or an argument paper, you have to defend why your claim, your main belief, is plausible. And you're going to give reasons and arguments. And the idea is to find really relevant and good reasons, and also to produce good, coherent arguments for the position that you have adopted. You should proofread. And again, to iterate, I would make a little outline and then also start developing a draft, a very, very rough draft. You should do spell check. We all make errors. I certainly do, and I catch them sometimes months or years later. I'm surprised nobody caught them. I'm not saying that that's forgivable per se, but I'm saying it's understandable. And now that we have nice word processing programs that kind of do that stuff for us, it's great. Word of caution, I definitely believe in spell check, but I still have a little bit of concern over grammar check. Sometimes although they've become ever more, sophisticated. Word processing, when it has a grammar check function, doesn't always produce what you think it should. Maybe a case in point is when you use, as I do frequently, voice recognition when I'm doing a text message to somebody. And it seems like either the automatic feature that is embedded in the application that allows you to do that decides to put a new word in. I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you. Or maybe change the grammar ever so slightly for some strange reason. A couple of devices I have, I've actually been able to figure out how to turn that off, but not all of them. And then later, after sending a text message, look it over and say, gee, I didn't say that. Or that doesn't make any sense. So in other words, this shouldn't be totally on autopilot. Take a good look, proofread, have somebody else proofread for you. Make a backup copy. And, you don't see this too terribly much in more modern operating systems, but I think at least up until like Windows 7, maybe 8. I'm primarily a Windows user. I have used Macintoshes before, but you get that error. Oop, didn't back it up. Now, if you have OneDrive and it's set for automatic upload, you're probably going to be safe. But just make sure that if you have to go back over and maybe bring your paper back up again, that you've saved it. Now, you may or may not want to write multiple drafts. Everything that I'm telling you here is just guideline. It's not, intended to make you follow this like a robot or program you, in a way which is awkward or pretty much against your nature. Not everybody writes a paper the same way. The main highlights, of course, to remember as a takeaway is it is a position or argument paper. You are defending a single claim. You are writing a 3 to 5 page double-spaced typewritten paper in the APA or MLA format. And there are several links that are up in your course, should be discoverable by you, that approach this issue possibly in a slightly different way than I am right now during the course of this presentation. But I'm just trying to give you many angles. And so one of the things to remember here is that if you're really going to try to do a good job, you're probably not going to do it 5 minutes before the paper's due. I have procrastinated when I was a student, put stuff off to the bitter end. Was very sorry that I did it, because I know that in some instances my paper could have been better if I had spent a little more time in preparation. Aside from some of the paper topic ideas that have been planted in your course, here's some ideas. What is the nature of mind? What would a guy like Epicurus, ancient Greek philosopher, think? What is his position? What is a good objection to his position? Now, one thing I should highlight here is that a good way to write a paper is to come up with an idea of your own, a claim you want to support. In the first paragraph or so, set out what you're going to do in your paper. In the main body of the paper, not only provide your argument, but also consider criticizing the argument of somebody else, that wherein there is a relationship between what you're saying and what they're talking about, and then show why you object. Why is the claim that you're, considering a bogus claim? How about the possibility of knowledge? We talked about Descartes. What about the dreaming hypothesis? Do you think that works well? You can, by the way, use movies like The Matrix. You can talk about philosophical themes that you've seen in certain kinds of video presentations. There are numerous movies that have a philosophical or metaphysical look to them. Interesting enough, a good many Tom Cruise movies are that way. Like Minority Report, for example, or Oblivion. I happened to watch that not too long ago. And various others. So, Blade Runner might be a case in point. Any of the superhero movies might have something that you would like to take a look at. But But what you're going to do is, if you're going to mention a movie, you give a little bit of a summary, and then point out the specific elements that you think you want to talk about that might help to defend or illustrate your hypothesis.